Greetings, salutations, and welcome to this, the 8th episode of the Egotistical Podcast. I am your most egotistical host, Tony LaRocca. I didn't want to do this. I wanted to give politics a break for a bit, but far too much dag-nasty wackiness is happening in this country right now. To quote Godfather 3, "Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in." Now, I need to warn you from the start, I have been declared hateful by both the left and the right, so I've just decided to embrace it. Speaking out against political ideologues is considered hateful by their devoted flocks. Apparently, I am a hateful person, so just to let you know, this will be a hateful episode. Let the hate flow through you, as Papa Palpatine once said, but I promise this will be a calm and peaceful hate. I will be using these soft chimes to help keep me focused and calm. I hope they work for you as well. Before we start, what exactly is hate? According to Webster's, hate means intense hostility and aversion, usually deriving from fear, anger, or sense of injury, extreme dislike or disgust. Digging deeper, it comes from the Old English word haton, which means to pursue or to chase with hostility. That in turn came from the Proto-Germanic word chatuna, which meant open acts of hostility, not just the emotion, but actions of aggression. But wait, there's more. Latin had two main words for hate, odium, which is the root of odious, and invidia, which is where we get the word envy. Different languages have different words for hating different things. Japanese has a whole slew of them for different shades of hate. What I find fascinating is languages that don't even have a word for it. Instead, they use the physical emotional reaction. I believe the Polynesian term comes down to something like, "it twists my stomach." So, 10 years ago, I had friends on the left whom I really cared about, who called me hateful and a lot of other names, because I spoke out against how divisive Hillary Clinton and her most rabid supporters had become. Or, even more bizarrely, because I said I didn't like a certain movie remake and a Super Bowl razor commercial. So they unfriended and blocked me on social media and never spoke to me again. And I was completely flabbergasted that everything I had done in my life, the entire person I am, was being boiled down to the word hateful, just because I did not like a political figure who could not care about them in the slightest. Because I did not like Secretary of State Clinton and the cancel culture she promoted, I was hateful. And I'm not talking about everyone on the left, just a handful. Just a small percentage, but it did hurt, to be honest, to be boiled down to that word, because some of them I actually did like very much. And people I knew on the right were like, "Oh, we understand. That's so horrible they treated you that way. We would never, ever do that. We are all above such petty things. That's the liberals who cancel others for things they don't like and who twist any criticism of their worshipped figures or policies into hate speech. We are so far above that." But then, ever since Trump retook office in 2025, as soon as I spoke out against the things he had done which are against my beliefs and ideals, as someone who identifies more on the right than on the left, to be honest, I instantly had Trump derangement syndrome. Once more I became, in a word, hateful. Again, I'm not talking about everyone on the right, just a tiny percentage. But it shocked me. Friends who were cops telling me that I am all for murder, crime, and mayhem, because I was speaking out against a president who once orchestrated a mob in his name that was screaming to kill the police with their own guns and drove 4 of them to suicide. Well, eventually all of this political malarkey of Trump's just got ignored, because people become immune after a while. We don't want it to be the focus of our lives. Why should it? Life is too important. Life is too precious. But then, on September 10th, a week ago, political commentator Charlie Kirk was tragically murdered, assassinated, whichever you want to call it. And this is so wrong and horrifying. And of course, being online much more than I really should, I noticed there were 2 responses to it. From the right came anger and mourning. From the left, I've never personally seen anyone say that this man deserved to be killed, although I am sure such people exist. Anonymity can bring out horrible things in people on the internet, just like it can when they're masked members of ICE, but I digress. But the vast majority of the sentiment from the left was that, although his death was horrible, tragic, and inexcusable, he had said things they did not agree with. Most importantly, ironically, he had been against gun control laws, to the point where he had called the victims of school shootings acceptable collateral. Now, as I mentioned 2 episodes ago, I grew up very Republican. I am a U.S. Army veteran, so I've always believed in the Second Amendment. I actually grew up with 2 rifles in my closet, though it never in a million years occurred to me to touch them, and I did get more than my fair share of bullying growing up, which I probably deserved in retrospect, but that's beside the point. The point is that when school shootings became vogue, starting with Columbine back in '99, at first, I agreed with the Republican Party's view. It was a mental health issue. It was a rare occurrence, and there was no reason to overreact. The Constitution was sacred, and that included the Second Amendment. However, as school shootings happened more and more frequently over the decades, a little nagging doubt birthed in the back of my mind and began to grow. As the Republican Party's response to these horrific acts of murder became more and more thoughts and prayers instead of action. And it wasn't just school shootings, more mass shootings began to occur across the nation. The right kept digging their heels in further and further against doing anything to actually stop them. I mean, okay, you say it's a mental health issue, but what are you doing for mental health? What care are you providing? What reasons for the causes of national stress and anger are you trying to diffuse instead of stoke? Here's something I've come to realize about myself. It's very hard to look at things objectively when the media and people you care about are all buying into the whole us versus them ideological garbage. Well, these children are dead because of you. Because you didn't vote for Hillary, Biden, Obama, or whomever. As I said a couple of episodes ago, shaming just doesn't work. It's just human nature, and that group accusation backlash does make it hard to look at things objectively. It's counterproductive. Then one day, my daughter's school had a shooting drill. They sent home a letter informing us about it and their procedures. I asked my daughter how she felt about it, and she was terrified. It gave her horrible fear and anxiety. For those who don't know, my daughter has special needs. She went to a special needs school until she was 22. So, here are these special needs children, not to mention all children throughout the country, being taught for decades that they have to be prepared in case one of their own or some outside kook comes into their school where they're supposed to be safe and tries to murder them. What words of reassurance could I possibly give? That's when it hit me. This is where I talk about things clicking. I'm speaking of my own personal journey here. I felt ashamed. I said, "Holy crap! What have I been turning a blind eye to? This is horrible. Not only for the deaths themselves, but for the terror and anxiety that we're making these kids go through by having to do these drills. Not that the drills themselves are wrong, but we're telling these kids, it's inevitable. So sorry. Some of you will likely get killed at some point. It's just statistically unavoidable. Can't do anything for you. Blame the fact that liberals banned Jesus in schools. Thoughts and prayers." And while I am never in a million years saying that he deserved his violent death, this was the attitude that Charlie Kirk preached. Here is an exact quote. "You will never live in a society when you have an armed citizenry, and you won't have a single gun death. I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. That is a prudent deal. It is rational." Now, this was in direct response to a school shooting that happened a week earlier, in March 2023, where 3 9-year-old children and 3 staff members had been murdered. Within the same speech, he also said, "Having an armed citizenry comes with a price. Driving comes with a price. 50,000 people die on the road every year. That's a price. You get rid of driving, you'd have 50,000 less auto fatalities. But we have decided that the benefit of driving, speed, accessibility, mobility, having products, services, is worth the cost of 50,000 people dying on the road." Again, his death was horrifying, but so is this point of view. You're saying that children should be collateral, no matter how you try to dress it up. And being the egotistically obnoxious person that I am, I said as such. I also mentioned Kirk's quote about empathy versus sympathy. I can't stand the word empathy, actually. I think empathy is a made-up New Age term, and it does a lot of damage. Sympathy I prefer more than empathy. Now, as I said in the last episode, in which I also said I didn't want to get mired in current events, but to heck with that, the difference is that empathy calls for us to try and put ourselves in someone else's shoes, to try and feel the pain that they felt and circumstances they were going through, while sympathy is just, "Oh, I feel bad for you." It is the deliberate removal of responsibility. And maybe if Charlie Kirk had tried to feel empathy instead of sympathy for these children's families, he wouldn't have been so outspoken against gun control laws that might have protected them. Or, at the very least, he wouldn't have publicly proclaimed that these children's deaths were acceptable collateral. Keep in mind, these are statements he publicly made to his followers. This is not him just overheard in a conversation, his private thoughts, or a journal. This was him publicly preaching to his flock. And somehow the man is being praised for being pro-life. I really don't understand how that works. How can you be pro-life if you see people's deaths, especially children's murders, as acceptable collateral? So anyway, I posted this online, just his own words. Well, not just his own words. There was a little bit of interpretation, I have to be honest. Immediately, 6 of my Facebook friends unfriended me. There was only one I really cared about who had been there for me during a recent tragedy. The rest were just a bunch of rectums, to be honest. My favorite was the jackanapes who unfriended me and then refriended me just so he could publicly spew a bunch of garbage and accusations at me, including, along with others, that I was hateful. And then, when I refuted everything he said, unfriended me again. That's social media for you. Once again, everything I am was suddenly boiled down to one word: hateful. Before I continue, I want to go back to what Charlie Kirk said about car deaths being acceptable and necessary, so why not the victims of school shootings? Well, no. The difference is, we don't accept car deaths. Cars are machines that are solely meant for transportation. We don't accept car deaths as necessary. We do everything possible to prevent them. We pass all kinds of laws not only about drivers, but regulations about how cars must be built, that they must be safe, that they must be roadworthy, crumple zones, airbags, DUI laws. It goes on and on and on. So again, a car's only purpose is transportation. But outside of target shooting and hunting, the only purpose of firearms is to kill another human being. Even if you say no, it's for defense, defense through firearms just means using the fear of death as a deterrent. So, how do you use the unacceptable accidental deaths from cars that we fight and try to prevent with laws and regulations as an excuse to accept the intentional deaths of other people, especially children, with guns? How do you perform the mental gymnastics to use accidental car deaths to try and prevent any sane laws and regulations to save the lives of children from being passed? Again, how do you do that and then get worshipped by your followers for being pro-life? A sentiment I've often heard from people on the right is, how does this happen? How does this happen? Is it video games? Is it TikTok? Is it abortion? It can't be that this generation knows they'll probably never be able to afford a home of their own, that they'll be indebted for life for college, that they're surrounded by anger, homelessness, hopelessness, that they'll never be able to afford medical care, that their current government openly scapegoats anyone who doesn't look like they came off the Mayflower, or people with different sexual orientations. It might even be, here's a thought, just something to think about, it might even be because we've raised a whole generation believing, as Charlie Kirk preached to his flock, that their deaths are acceptable collateral for the Second Amendment. Maybe when we train them to try and survive being murdered in their own schools because it's inevitable, instead of actually trying to stop it. We can't do anything for you, just thoughts and prayers. Can't pass any laws that might protect you. Sorry. Maybe when we teach these kids that we think their lives don't have any value in the face of ideology, it cheapens their view of life. Something to think about. So, again, for pointing these things out, especially for pointing out that once again this view is the exact opposite of the teachings of Jesus, something else Charlie Kirk is revered for being so outspoken for Christian values, right? Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these." He didn't say, "Let the little twerps live in fear and anxiety, and let their deaths be collateral for your political party, alongside those RFK told you not to immunize." Om. So, once again, this time by the right instead of the left, by quoting Charlie Kirk in the wake of his death, I was being hateful. But this is what I don't understand. How can someone call it hateful to quote a person unless they themselves consider his words hateful? It makes zero sense. I can't really complain about cancel culture when I stick my neck out. Play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. I can't say controversial things publicly without expecting controversy back, and nobody has to agree with me. But when the disagreement comes not as logic or facts, but the dismissal that I am a fool, I'm suffering from Trump derangement syndrome, I've fallen for the lies of the left, and now I'm hateful, apparently. It's one thing to disagree, discuss, or even logically argue. But when people react with vicious ad hominems or canceling, again, as with Hillary, all for the sake of a president who could not give two puddles of poop about you, all that tells me is deep inside, they know that their own views are wrong. Or at the very least, they question them, and that mere questioning makes them afraid. I think, too, and I'm not the first person to suggest this, I think it also comes down to Christian martyrdom. I remember growing up as a Catholic how deeply martyrdom was revered. People behind the Iron Curtain, hey, remember when the right believed that Russia was evil? Yeah, people in Russia and China who were willing to die for their faith were worshipped. Is that what all this is? This embracing of a fascist president, his anger, hate, and racism to the death? Because to suffer the slings and arrows of torment when people say he is wrong somehow makes them a martyr, just like Christ? I know I sound like I'm mocking, but the truth is I understand, I really do. Because it's hard and frightening when you've been thinking one way all your life, and all your friends and family and social network believe the same thing, and then things happen that question it. So, at first you poke all their holes in their arguments that you can find, no matter how tiny. And your gut reaction is to be angry and annoyed and mock them. But eventually that little nagging doubt begins. You start seeing things from the point of view of others. You start imagining life from the point of view of a child, maybe your children, being afraid of being killed in school because their parents refuse to accept any sane gun laws. You start wondering what it would be like to be dragged into a van by some random masked person just based on the color of your skin. Or maybe, now, you can imagine what it's like to hear the president and his followers preaching with fire and thunder from their pulpits that, against all statistics, your sexual orientation is the sole cause of political violence in this country. No wonder the Charlie Kirks of the world are so much against empathy. It upsets you, and it's frightening, and you wonder if you really are a part of the problem. And it hurts and it's scary because the church you've devoted your life to is telling you this vile president is in office because it's the will of God. It's the will of Jesus, even when everything he says and does is against Christ's teachings. So you turn away from anything that questions what you've been taught deep in your soul. You stay in the comfort of those pundits who reassure you and reaffirm your views. And when they stoke your fear and anger against anyone who disagrees with you, it actually feels good, because it's what you're used to. It's the direction your mind has gone in all its life. Victimization and the certainty that you are right feels very powerful. So yes, I understand. But just having anger at Trump makes you hateful now. It doesn't matter why you may be angry. That doesn't matter at all. Just to speak of him with anger in your voice makes you hateful. This is the new fascist tactic that the right has taken. And you know what's hysterical? 10 years ago, when it wasn't warranted, I was the one defending the right when the left knee-jerk called them fascists. And as I've said before, and I hate to agree with Trump, but he has made the same statement, it is true. That then unwarranted hyperbole and cancel culture from the left that jumped to calling anyone on the right Nazis and fascists for no reason is a huge part of why we're here now. The rest is the horrible economy under Biden, but I am digressing. And no, I'm not saying all Republicans are fascist. Absolutely not. Again, many of them are good, loving people. But yes, the party senators, congressmen, talking media propagandists, and absolutely 100% President Donald Trump have engaged the ideology wholeheartedly. But now that's considered hateful to point that out, especially if you list all the reasons why. And that's their new tactic. Calling Trump and his policies out for what they are is hateful and inciting violence. Again, this is from a president who orchestrated a violent mob that attacked the police. Why do I bother? All the things he did doesn't matter. I'm just hateful for reminding people. I'm hateful for being angry at Trump. The actual reasons why I'm angry don't matter, but oh well. You know something? I was originally planning to give politics a rest, even in the wake of Charlie Kirk's shooting. I was planning on talking about something fun like AI. However, a new wrinkle has been added to the metaphorical scrotum of America, which made me say no, this needs to be discussed. Last weekend, comedian Jimmy Kimmel, who has been very outspoken against President Trump, said this on his late-night talk show. We hit some new lows over the weekend with the MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it. In response to this, Trump's appointed FCC chairman Brendan Carr publicly threatened ABC, the network that hosts Jimmy Kimmel, saying, "When you look at the conduct that has taken place by Jimmy Kimmel, it appears to be some of the sickest conduct possible. I mean, look, we can do this the easy way or the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct, to take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead." The result was that ABC took Kimmel's show off the air indefinitely. Now, I've always been against cancel culture. I was against ABC firing Gina Carano from The Mandalorian because of her anti-far-left remarks. But of course, as a business, they had the right to do whatever they wanted. But this is completely different. This is a First Amendment violation, because it happened as a result of the government publicly threatening a network over criticism of the president, which Kimmel has done often, and how the Republicans have weaponized the tragic murder of Charlie Kirk. Keep in mind that months ago, When Trump critic Stephen Colbert was also removed from television under similar circumstances, Trump publicly said, "Fallon has no talent. Kimmel has no talent. They're next. They're going to be going." This is a preemptive threat by a president against his critics. Now, this is purely speculation, but as with the firing of late-night talk show host Stephen Colbert, who again was also very outspoken against Trump, ABC affiliate Nexstar has a merger in the works, of which it needs FCC approval. So that's not so much of a smoking gun as the FCC chairman openly threatening ABC, but it is pretty strong additional circumstantial evidence of government interference. Of course, the FCC chairman can't admit this is because Kimmel dared to criticize our glorious leader or point out how, as I said, the Republicans are weaponizing Kirk's murder. So, instead, he and the other Republicans and their propagandists and Trump himself are focusing on this one line. The MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them. According to Brendan Carr, etc., 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 this statement was Kimmel appearing to directly mislead the American public about a significant fact. My friends, we're going to get to why this isn't true in a moment, but let's try and keep something in mind here. Kimmel is a comedian. He is not a newscaster or a politician. He holds no office. No, he should not lie, and he should be called out if he lies or misspeaks or stretches the truth, absolutely. But Fox, OAN, Trump, Pam Bondi, Kristi Noem, Tulsi Gabbard, they spew lies to the American public blatantly and constantly. It is disgusting to ignore them and their never-ending stream of falsehoods when people look to them for facts and the truth and leadership, and pretend that a late-night comedian is supposed to be some paragon of virtue whose words should be sifted through with a fine-toothed comb and should be silenced for any perceived deviation. Remember, these are pundits who claimed that millions of illegals were voting in the election. Not true. They insisted that Haitian immigrants were eating people's pets. Insanely ridiculous. They and Trump are continuously trying to scapegoat immigrants and LGBTQ+ human beings. They are constantly trying to create an atmosphere of fear and hate. And whenever you call them out on it, they turn around and say, "No, you're the one being hateful because you dare to criticize us." Okay, once again, I am digressing from the main point here. Let's get back to Jimmy Kimmel. So, once again, I read these words, or heard right-wing pundits and politicians angrily. Remember, it is right and just for Trump and his chosen ones to speak of their enemies with anger, just not the rest of us. Anyway, I read these words, or heard right-wing pundits and politicians angrily repeat them. The MAGA gang desperately trying to characterize this kid who murdered Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them. I originally agreed that Kimmel's comment was meant to imply that the murderer was MAGA, meaning a Trump supporter, as Trump and company claim. I agreed that this was incorrect and possibly inflammatory. I was disappointed and more than a little perturbed that he would make such a sweeping accusation. I tried thinking it over. Maybe he meant that the killer had been raised in a Trump-supporting household, which he was. It's true, but the guy's own politics did veer to the left by all accounts. And it wouldn't be fair of me to just excuse Kimmel for that, even though I agree with him on the rest of it. So I said, okay, let me find the clip itself. Let me see if there's more to it. Again, I had just read the transcript or heard pundits repeating it, but after finally listening to the clip, it's absolutely clear from Kimmel's inflection that he was not claiming that the shooter was MAGA. He was, in fact, pointing out their attempts to distance themselves from anything about him. For example, harping constantly on his relationship with a transgender person. Because, as I said, that's the newest thing the far right wants to scapegoat. And it makes absolutely zero sense. If you look at the statistics, less than 1% of mass shooters are LGBTQ plus human beings. So if you feel that sexual orientation has anything to do with mass shooters, then, from that logic, you must blame heterosexuality, because straight people are responsible for more than 99% of the shootings. And I think it's very wrong of you to be so prejudiced against straight people like me. Some of my best friends are straight. So once we get past this statement, which is what the right are deliberately trying to twist and what the FCC is focusing on, even though, as I said, they're holding a comedian to a ridiculously high standard while politicians and pundits American turn to for facts and truth blatantly lie and lie and lie and lie, the most important part of the quote is this: that the MAGA gang, as he puts it, are, quote, doing everything they can to score political points from it. This is absolutely 100% true. This is why Kimmel was taken off the air. They are whipping the nation up into a frenzy of fear and vengefulness. They are using this murder as an excuse to take away your First Amendment rights. Let's make this clear once again. If a company chooses to fire someone over what they say, that is not technically a First Amendment violation. The First Amendment only applies to the government. So in this case, that is clearly what happened when the chairman of the FCC threatens a network openly over a comedian's criticisms, and then the next day the network takes them off the air. There is no question that this was done because of government pressure. Look at the way they are using Kirk's killing to scream over and over that calling the president and his orders and actions fascist is incendiary hate speech that must be silenced. Let more good, kind individuals be martyred a la Kirk. But what else do you call it when a president orchestrates a mob that attacked the police, screaming that they were Nazis and to kill them with their own guns in his name because he lost a fair and legal election? The president who pardoned all 1,500 of these traitors. The president who could have used the National Guard to stop them, as he constantly reminds us he has the power to, but refused because they were doing it all for him. What else do you call it when the president, for the first time in the U.S.'s history, openly spoke of acquiring peaceful sovereign nations, Greenland and Panama, in his State of the Union address? The president who has scapegoated illegal immigrants as an excuse to erode the Constitution and whittle away the separation of powers meant to protect us from tyranny. The president now trying to scapegoat LGBTQ plus human beings for shootings, even though they only make up a tiny percentage of shooters. The National Guard is unconstitutionally being deployed on city streets on the flimsiest of pretexts throughout the country to normalize the idea of martial law. Masked, unshielded, ununiformed officers can enter people's homes without warrants to search for illegal immigrants. They have the right to detain people based solely on their skin color, including legal U.S. citizens. Through their anonymity, they deliberately have no accountability in the way law enforcement always has in this country, all at the will of the president who openly kisses the butt cheeks of a dictator while the people that dictator invaded suffer. How about the fact that Trump and his ilk are constantly trying to whip this nation up into a cesspool of hate and terror, trying so hard to make his followers angry and afraid of everyone else, especially now after Charlie Kirk's death? So, if that's not what you call fascism, then what do you call it? Should what I just said really be considered hate speech, just for describing what is happening in our country? I suppose so. Like I said, that's why I am donning my black Sith robes and popping the Kyber crystal D cells into my red lightsaber. I am firing up the lightning in my fingertips. I am embracing the hate. Besides, I look good in black. I want to add something here. I mentioned before that I supported the Second Amendment, and I do. I believe people should be able to have a gun for sport, for target shooting, for hunting, and yes, for home defense. And as with people across the political spectrum, many gun owners and enthusiasts are good, decent human beings. But I also believe there should be sane gun laws. I believe that, in the same way Charlie Kirk brought up car deaths and how we do everything possible to prevent them, we should be doing everything possible to prevent mass shootings. Yes, there are arguments against why laws are not a cure-all. Laws only work on the law-abiding citizens. Laws can't stop 3D printed guns. But they do make a difference. There are statistically less gun deaths in states with strong gun laws than there are in ones with lax laws. It's ridiculously easy for someone to get a gun in a state with lax laws and then bring them across state lines. Mass shooting fatalities went up 5-fold after the assault weapon ban was repealed back in 2004. So, just because gun control laws don't completely fix the problem, as I said in my last episode about anxiety and depression, root problems need to be addressed. We need to look at poverty. We need to look at mental health. We need to look at all the things Doge worked so hard under Donald Trump to make worse. But just because the laws alone don't completely fix the problem, why does that mean we need to throw our hands in the air and say, "Sorry, kids, you just have to accept that you have to die"? And for those who say they need their arsenals to protect themselves from tyranny, what in tarnation do you call the current regime? Now, lest some wackadoo tries to twist my words the way they are with Jimmy Kimmel, let me say I am not in any way, shape, or form condoning violence. I am against violence. Violence is wrong and should never be used against anyone except in defense, either personal or militarily. But again, if you feel you need an arsenal to protect yourself against a tyrannical government, what do you think that tyranny will look like? Is it all the fascist things I mentioned before that are happening under President Trump? Or is it the CDC telling you you need to take a vaccine to save your lives, the lives of your children, and those around you through herd immunity? And be honest. You would never use your guns against the police or the military because you know you would instantly become a grease spot if you did. And again, I have to stipulate that is not meant as a challenge. I just don't see the point. Why dig your heels in when your sons' and daughters' lives, or at least their emotional well-being, are in the balance? Remember, Jimmy Kimmel did not say anything negative about Charlie Kirk after his death or cheer on his assassination itself. Kimmel actually did say that he abhorred Kirk's murder. That's not why he was taken off the air. he was taken off the air for daring to say the truth about how Trump and the Republican Party have weaponized the death of Charlie Kirk. Think that over, please. This had nothing to do with disrespecting the dead or even saying that the shooter was MAGA, which he didn't. But it has everything to do with criticizing President Trump. Does anyone else remember? Now, he wasn't my favorite president or anything like that, but does anyone remember when W invited Colbert to roast him at the press dinner? And Colbert was vicious and basically tore into former President George W. Bush on Iraq and other failed policies that he disagreed with. And while reportedly Bush wasn't happy with what was said, he never publicly went after Colbert. He never went on a vendetta against him. He just smiled and shook his hand. He didn't act like a tantruming baby for being criticized. Trump, on the other hand, not only is he using Kirk's death as yet another excuse to foment fear, anger, and hate, he is using the killing as an excuse to silence another popular critic and take away your First Amendment rights. Trump himself said it months ago. The word is, and it's a strong word at that, Jimmy Kimmel is next to go in the untalented late-night sweepstakes, and shortly thereafter, Fallon will be gone. He added, "It's really good to see them go, and I hope I played a major part in it." There goes your First Amendment rights out the window. Yes, Virginia, this is fascism. Hold up. Wait. There's been some breaking news. I thought I was done with this episode, but things move fast in this wacky country of ours. I recorded this Sunday morning, Sunday the 21st of September. It is now the 22nd, and apparently, tomorrow, on the 23rd, Jimmy Kimmel will return. After a week, ABC is taking him back. And by all accounts, he refuses to apologize, which is absolutely wonderful, because he has nothing to apologize for. Now, while it is absolutely wonderful that his First Amendment rights, and in retrospect, all of America's First Amendment rights, have been restored because, it's bad for the government to bully a network into silencing a critic, right? So while that is absolutely wonderful, something much scarier happened in the Trump administration's ongoing war against the First Amendment, well, for anyone else but them and their kind. According to the AP News, the Pentagon will now require credentialed journalists to sign a pledge not to report on things they don't want revealed to the public, including unclassified information. Secretary of Defense Pete, he who openly hates democracy, Hegseth. Seriously, look it up. He has a long list of diatribes about how much he despises democracy. At his most Orwellian, had this to say on the subject. The press does not run the Pentagon. The people do. The press is no longer allowed to roam the halls of a secure facility. Wear a badge and follow the rules, or go home. Now, here is what it says word for word in the United States Constitution's First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So, yeah. I'm really happy Jimmy Kimmel is back on the air, and do think it obviously is insane for the FCC to be threatening networks to silence critics of our great, glorious orange leader. But this development is much more frightening. This is much more dangerous. This is Trump's government saying we don't want the people to know non-classified information we don't approve of. This is the Trump administration wanting you to be less informed of what your government is doing. Again, for those who keep insisting that this administration is not fascist and that it's just... And you know what? Instead of beating the dead horse that this is a prime example of fascism, instead, let's talk about another presidential story. And once again, it's not a president I particularly liked or agreed with. This is a story I've only heard recently because of current events. Back in 1968, the Smothers Brothers made jokes at President Lyndon B. Johnson's expense, and the political climate being then much different than it is now, they wrote the White House a letter apologizing and saying they hope they didn't offend him. Here is LBJ's reply. "It is part of the price of leadership of this great and free nation to be the target of clever satirists. You have given the gift of laughter to our people. May we never grow so somber or self-important that we fail to appreciate the humor in our lives." As a parting note, you may be asking, what is the point? Why am I saying all this? Is it to further say, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong, or to shame Trump supporters? No, that's not what I'm saying or trying to do, as hateful as I am. You are fellow Americans, you have dignity, you have the right to your thoughts and feelings, you are not animals, you are not my enemy. I am asking, please, don't buy into the hate that Donald Trump is selling. Be aware of the fear and anger he is so desperately trying to stoke. I'm asking you just to take notice of every time he and his ilk try to make you and everyone else feel like the rest of the nation is your enemy. That anyone who disagrees with him or you in any way is a covert source of political violence that must be silenced at all costs to keep us safe. And ask yourself what kind of America he is creating. To quote good old Jeshua ben Joseph, "For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you." Okay, sorry, this ending is for reals this time. Once again, you have been kind enough to listen to this, the Hateful Eighth episode of the Egotistical Podcast. Thank you, Quentin Tarantino. I remain your egotistical host, Tony LaRocca. For more information, please check out egotisticalproductions.com. I have extremely loving lasagna.